Good morning, everyone. How is the class for you? I'm in the process of opening the next few weeks. I have opened week 4, and I am almost finished with week 5. And so this week is sort of the last of the beginning section, sort of part 1. Then at the end of this week, we got that first test. And I want to talk to you about, make sure you feel comfortable about that material. And then after that, we're going to be more going into the bones and into the muscles. And then we're going to do that in the classroom as well. So the ones of us who go into the classroom, again, it's not mandatory. It's in person, it's an optional component. I'm going to start sending some text out to figure out who wants to be in the class and start organizing that this week. So respond back to me so I can make sure I have the right numbers and all of that, how to do that. But let's, if you don't have questions, let's just go right into me sharing the screen. And oops, I got a lot of stuff open here. All right, so far you guys now see week 4 also. There's this blue this green check mark tells me that this is the teacher view. And then I'm gonna later on today, when we're finishing up, open all of these up to test 2. Now you don't have to go there yet, but I know some of you guys are have been already working on week 3 material. So I can imagine, some of you want to start moving forward a little bit and peek into the next weeks potentially. But as we finish up this section, we're going to have us that first test. And that first test is going to be 55 questions, and the time limit is 75 minutes, except if you have some, paperwork for longer. If you have technical problems or so, all of a sudden the internet crashes or something, communicate with me. Don't think it's, oh my God, all is lost or something. The test is an open book test. It should be okay, not too crazy. It's mostly true, false, and multiple choice questions. This is one where you only have one attempt because it is a test. So again, make sure you communicate with me if something goes awry or what's going on. I'm here to help you, not to punish you for problems that can come up. But what is most important, I think, to prepare for it is this test review. And the format is kind of like the questions that you're already taking. So the test format is that quiz tool that Canvas provides. So you should be familiar with it by now, I hope. But again, to prepare for the test, make sure you go through all the chapters, bullet points that I have here, and understand all of those points. Because if you do understand all of those points of these chapters, you're going to be fine with the test. Everything is spelled out that way. I do encourage you to go to the PDF version, download it and print it out so you have a paper next to you while you take the test. At least for me, old person, that kind of, this is the way I like to do it. Have paper with me. So make sure you look at that test review. You should have been looking already at it, hopefully, to sort of integrate the information as you work through it. All right, so that's the test. Any questions to that? If you do, just interrupt me while I keep talking. This is week 3 that we're looking at now. Week 3 talks about cells. Cells are the smallest structures that are alive in our body, and so we're made up of those cells. We got some trillions of those in us, so it's a big construction that is us. So we're gonna look at the cell parts. We're also gonna describe how protein is made. That's a very important function of the cells. And then we also go into cell division. And we talk a little bit about cellular transport, how things move in and out of the cell, or also within the cell. And then so we have a few activities to that here coming up. Then the second chapter this week is the tissue chapter. And so you take cells together and have some other products that the cells make, some extracellular matrix, for example, and then you create different tissue types. We have 4 types of tissues, and I'll show you a picture in a minute of that. And so what we do is we go and explain these tissue types in more detail in the chapter of what is the function, what are some of the characteristics, where do we find it. This is sort of the chapter where a lot of times we have microscopes on the table and do that, but I'm actually not unhappy that, we're not in the microscope world right now, because I can bring pictures and then we don't have to focus on always trying to make it sharp so we can see the image. So these are the activities. We still have some questions. We have one more understanding concept, and then we're done with those. And then I wanted you to have a little talk with each other about the food label. If you learned something, that's from last week. And then in this week, we have a project and then the tab Padlet. So it's not that many activities that we're doing this week. So let's just go briefly into the lecture portion. And again, any questions, just interrupt me. These videos take a moment to load. I still have some transcripts, thank God. I don't know if any of you use the transcripts. I gotta keep working on those. So if somebody of you use the transcript, communicate with me, because after this chapter, I kind of am behind. And so I have to prioritize that if it's really useful. If it's not that big of a deal, then I can prioritize other things. But if we start with looking at the cell, we look at the cell looks like that as a generic cell. And generic means we have a construct that doesn't necessarily resemble of what a specific cell, like a muscle cell, looks like, but it's generic and has all the components that we usually see in a cell. A cell has a cell membrane. It's surrounded by a phospholipid bilayer. We learned that last chapter. That sort of makes this boundary from the inside to the outside. Again, boundaries is one of the things we need to be able to be alive. And then we have stuff inside here. We have a nucleus, obviously, that many of us know about that because we know about the genes and we know about the genetic material. And that's all that DNA stuff is all in here. These little thread things. This is the genetic material, the DNA, double helix. And DNA is a cookbook for protein, as you've learned some in chemistry, but you'll learn definitely in this chapter a lot. And what we do is we make a copy of that, and then that copy squeezes out of this nucleus and goes to these red dots, and that's where we make proteins. And then this blue structure here is another structure that helps us package things together. And then we have another structure here that's sort of like a post office that packages things that go in and out of the cell, that puts membranes around it, because that's sort of like, it's like at the post office, we package it up. Part of how I look at a cell is like, we always ask the question, what do we need to do? What is important? And so then I kind of look almost like in a village. So to be self-sufficient. So we have a power plant. We need to make this ATP, that's the mitochondria. We have these factories, these protein factories, they build stuff. We have a post office that packages things together. We also have lysosomes are degrading vacuoles. They're little spheres that have degrading molecules in it, like hydrogen peroxide and things like that, that help us break down things that come into the cell. So things come into the cell. That could be some dangerous, virus. So a lysosome is able to break it down and destroy it a lot of the times. Then we got filaments, we got construction material. These are sort of scaffolding type materials. There is some really cool videos that I put behind this chapter here. So go make sure you look at these videos because it's really nice how visualization helps. So these are some of the parts which will go into these parts. They're called organelles. See here some of the videos, and they have these different names, and we'll go into more detail on them. But, you know, generally we want to have them be sort of do a specific structure and understand it that way, always in mind that things are probably more complicated than we make them out to be. And that's why some of the videos are cool when we get to the cell division. I have a video here. This thing here is fantastic. This guy visualizes how molecules look, and these are the scaffolding microtubules and so forth, and they really look like that in the cell. And so if you don't shortchange yourself by not watching these shorter ones videos. They're not long, but they really help understand the material, I think, very well. Anyway, the organelles, so we talked a little bit about that, and then we have hereditary material, that's the DNA. So we'll have a little discussion on chromosomes, nothing too fancy, just so you kind of understand from where that double helix chromosomes goes into a double helix, and then ultimately goes into these nucleotides that then become that genetic code, that then we can take those and make a copy of those. And depending on the sequence of these 4 nucleotides is going to tell us what protein that we're ultimately going to make. We get a copy of it into the RNA, and then from there we get into the different amino acids. And remember from the chemistry chapter, a protein is a lot of amino acids put next to one another and made into a bead. And then it folds up and wiggles around, and some of them become tendons. So these fibrous proteins are strong, and they have like a tendon. Think of an Achilles heel tendon. But then some of them fold up and become more 3-dimensional or globular, and then those are more functioning proteins, such as like the hemoglobin, for example, that carry oxygen. So anyway, but the baseline is we go to the DNA, we make a copy, and then we make the protein from there. And that's really a big reason why we want to talk in this class, understanding the genetic material that then makes the protein. So here's the protein making. So this describes the copy of the DNA into an RNA, and then this describes how the RNA goes and makes these beads of amino acids, which resembles the proteins. And so we describe these 2 processes of transcription and translation. Again, terminology, what's most more important is figure out a way to maybe remember it, but understand what's going on. That's much more important. You can always look up these words. So that's what this is here. And then the second big piece is cell division. And basically, when a cell divides, a cell grows, and then at some point we have to make more cells. So in cells, we just grow the cell and then split it in half and make 2 cells out of it. And so you see that in this process. And for most of these little organelles, that's all right. We can just push some to one side, some to the other side, and split it in half. And we have some mitochondria here, some mitochondria here. The problem, though, is the genetic material, because we need to make sure we have a specific copy on one side, on one cell, and the same copy on the other cell, because the 2 daughter cells are equals. They're going to have to divide as well. And that genetic material needs to be maintained as well as we can maintain it. And so this mitosis, the cell division, the word is mitosis, really describes how these chromosomes get pulled from one side of the cell to the other side after they've been copied, and then assured that one copy is in each of the daughter cells. So if you go through that, keep that in mind. That's really the biggest reason why we have all this description here. But it looks really freaking cool. I mean, I think this visualization stuff is phenomenal. And again, watch the movies. Those are really cool movies. Good. Cellular transport. Well, things need to go in and out of the cell, and we have different ways of, and also things need to be transported within the cell. And so we describe different transports, and for the most part, what we're looking at is we're looking at passive transports and then active transports down here. The passive transport is when molecules move without a need for energy, without a need for ATP. So the word there is that we're going to use is called the concentration gradient. The passive processes use a concentration gradient to move molecules around. So if you use tea and put sugar in a tea and you put a sugar cube in a tea, the sugar cube is very highly concentrated sugar, and the tea part at the beginning is not at all. And so what happens is the molecules want to move naturally from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration and balance themselves out within the process. Of course, you can swirl the tea around, goes a little faster, but ultimately that's what happens. And that's what that means, the concentration gradient. I know these fancy words sometimes. And so we have a few different ones. We can have a sugar cube dissolve in the tea, but we can also have a membrane that only lets sugar go in when we want it to go in. And it still is passive. We have a channel, for example, a protein in the cell membrane. This resembles the cell membrane here, plasma membrane. And so we have these different ways. We also have this process called osmosis, where we have a membrane and molecules can penetrate the membrane. The glucose can't go through. But what happens is the water wants to balance out, so the molecules are balanced out. And that's osmosis. So that's an interesting, that's a little more complicated than simply the filtration. I mean, simply the diffusion, which is the sugar cube. Filtration is another one. I'm not sure where the filtration is. Do I not even have filtration there? Now here, filtration is another one, but that's, we know that from making coffee. So things filter through a sieve and stuff stays behind. And that's filtration. And then the active processes are generally, they always use ATP, they use energy. And so that's what makes them active. The biggest one here is that we have these pumps, and we have to create environments that are different between the inside and the outside of a cell. Because, for example, we need to make a nerve impulse, and the nerve impulse is really a lot of these charged molecules, these sodiums and these potassiums, wherever the potassium is down here, move across the cell membrane and bring these charges with them. That's the electricity. That's the nerve impulse thing. But the problem is you're going to move molecules around cell membrane to create a nerve impulse, but then you scramble the molecules. You move the charge around, but you scramble the molecules. And so you got these pumps. We have these tons of these pumps that then move the molecules back into their original place where they were to reestablish that situation so the next nerve impulse can happen, for example. So these pumps are very interesting. Sodium-potassium pump is one of the big ones. And then the other thing we got is, hold on, do I get it? No, the other thing we got is things having to move in and out of the cell. So we call that endocytosis or exocytosis. And so these are some words that you will come across. So that's pretty much it, what we got for the chapter on cells. Any questions to that stuff? If not, we'll move to the tissues. I just want to show you a few visuals on the tissues. Because now we're moving more and more from, chemistry, that's the small stuff, to cells that's still tiny and we can't really visualize it, although we can start visualizing it. And now we're moving to tissues, and that's sort of when we start seeing what's going on in the body. And we have 4 types of tissues, and tissues are often compared to fabrics that make up the body. We have a nervous tissue, we have muscle tissue, we have epithelial tissue, and we have connective tissue. The nervous tissue we talk about when we talk about the brain and the nervous system. The muscle tissue coming up soon when we talk about the muscles. So we're going to talk about those tissues and what they need to do when we get to those chapters. But we're going to, this chapter, focus on epithelial tissue and connective tissue. Epithelial tissue is, if you want to describe it, what it is and where do you find it? In general, you find it on surrounding things like the body, the skin, that's epithelial tissue. Lining things like the GI tract, the gut, or also the blood vessels on the inside. And then we also have some glands that are epithelial tissue, and a very few amount of nerve receptors, like that in the eye, for example. because they have a similar origin, which is interesting, actually. Epithelial tissue and nervous tissue, similar origin. And then, so that's that type. And then we have connective tissue. And that's, I often remember that connects things together, because that's a very vast tissue type, goes from fat, goes to bone, goes to blood or tendons. They're all the same tissue type because they're made up similarly. If we look at that real quick, they all are made up with cells and then have things in between the cells, and they always have fiber and the so-called ground substance. And that brings, you know, the ground substance can be in a bone, it's calcium, and in a blood, it's water or liquid. And so that way, then these tissue types, they're the same tissue type, but they look very, very differently from one another. But let's go back to epithelial real quick, because what we do there is we basically go through and we talk about the function. What does it do? You know, the skin protects, the gut lining absorbs nutrients, and so these kind of things. And then we talk about how does it look, the characteristics, like it's a lot of cells, for example. It doesn't have that other stuff that the connective tissue has, that extracellular matrix. It only has cells. And then we go further and talk about the cell shapes and the layers, and we start describing them, because when you start describing these epithelial tissues, you say like, oh, this is, for example, the inside of the lung, the alveoli, the little air sacs that absorb the oxygen and bring it to the blood. They are a very thin layer of simple squamous epithelial tissue, and that describes the way that the cells look and how many layers you have. Squamous look from above looks like a fried egg that, you know, is a thin center in the middle, and that's the nucleus. So they're very, very thin, paper thin. So you do use that, for example, for diffusion. That's great for diffusion. Something needs to penetrate through. So that's again where you can end up seeing structure dictates function, because then you have another cell type, the cuboid ones, and that's actually a good word because it's cube shaped. And we have that often is good for secretion and absorption. For example, the glands or the walls of the kidneys are that. And then we have columnar types, and they get a little sturdier and stronger and are longer than wide. And you find those in the gut lining, where you, for example, have more abrasion because food passes by versus water, liquidy stuff passing by. And so there is this function dictates structure stuff. So I don't really focus too much on that chapter where you just have to go and look at tissues and memorize them, like often we did in the old days. I like for you to go through this chapter and try to understand how it's made up before you just memorize, or, you know, again, you don't even have to memorize for my test because they are open book tests. So it is always much better to understand the topic. Anyway, that goes through. There's some surface, some connections, and some surface differentiations, so a few different characteristics that some epithelials have. And then we briefly talk about the gland ones, and I'm not sure the sensory ones. Well, just a one-liner. And then we go into this connective tissue discussion, where we have so many different tissue types. We have fat cells are made up or connective tissue. We have this is a muscle tendon stuff. This is cartilage stuff. Then we have bone even. Bone is, we do bone separately. And so all of those tissues have cells that are making up the tissue, and then those cells produce substances, and that is intercellular substance. So intercellular means in between cells. Intracellular would mean inside the cell. So make sure you read this terminology very slow. In part, why I don't use many words in my text is because I want you to slow down the reading to really visualize what we're talking about. Often in a book, with sentences, we read over things, and these are so many foreign words. It's very important to be slow in the reading process or the processing process. Here we talk about then deeper when we look at the intercellular substance. One of them is fiber. We have a few different fiber types. They have different qualities. Like one fiber type is in the ear. You can bend an ear and it goes right back to its original shape, or the same as a nose cartilage. That's fiber in there. They are very bendable and flexible and elastic. They call them elastic fibers, actually. And then we got fiber type that is very strong, like in a tendon, like your Achilles tendon. They're very strong and you can't pull them apart. They're stronger than steel is when you distend them. And those are collagen fibers. I call collagen sort of the super glue in the body. Everything you need to patch up, collagen fibers right there for that. Okay, and then, yeah, talk about a few different tissue types. The video goes more into it. And then we go deeper into the cartilage, and then the types of cartilage. The cartilage is the ear, the nose, but also the rib ends or the ends of bones. We have and we have different ones that make up different. For example, the ends of bones is this cartilage. And then the ear is this cartilage or the nose, because it's more bendable, it's flexible. And then like in your spine, in the back, the intervertebral discs, or also the meniscus in the knee, for example, is fibrocartilage. That looks different too. That's much more tough and less bouncy in quality. And so we talk a little bit about that, and then we segue into the bone chapter through describing that tissue type, that connective tissue type more in detail. And he talks about what the bone is, the supporting tissue, a little bit about it, and the functions of bone. So we're starting to here segue now into the skeletal system a little bit this week. Yeah, so the cells describes it more, and then also the outside part, the extracellular matrix in the bone. That's the hard stuff. That's the calcium. And look at that. It's really kind of cool the way it looks and the way it's made up. So I want you to go through this, and then we finish up with looking at different shapes. So now we're really going into the gross, the bigger anatomy. And then finally, we have a little discussion about how bone is made, because we have these little kids, they are born as babies, and then they have to grow. And how do we grow these bones in length, and how do we grow these bones in width, basically? So that's that. Any questions to this second chapter? I know it's just a very brief overview, but I want to make sure it's not like, with having a little overview, at least it's not that big chapter that is hard to tackle. And then each chapter has these questions to it, like we always do. And then we have one more understanding concept. I think, go more into the protein synthesis a little bit. I think it's only, yeah, here. Uh-oh. Now, how the hell did that link get out? Hold on, I gotta take that down. Oh, I tell you, this Canvas is really a cool program, but it's very challenging keeping everything going. So I'm going to have to find what that was about. Sorry about that. But here is a couple of questions. Protein synthesis. I would like you to talk a little bit in your own words, and then about mitosis. And I'm going to figure out where these other videos went. And understanding concept. And then finally here, we did the food label analysis this week. And then this one, I just want you to talk to a couple of classmates. And what do we, what did I learn from the food analysis, and what impact, if any, does it have in my life? A lot of you guys are already talking about that. I see it in the Padlet, which I really appreciate you guys doing the Padlets, because that's, for me, a good gauge of how things are. And by the way, in the Padlets, if you can't sign in, and somehow it's not always that easy, just put your name, in the description. That way I know whom to give credit for. Otherwise, it just says anonymous, which is fine, but that way it's a little harder to give credit if it's anonymous. What else do I need to say about this year. Oh, the other thing about the discussions, that if you don't get full credit and you reply, mostly it's because you didn't reply yet to some people, and maybe you were the first one, there wasn't anybody. But text, then you do a reply or a couple of replies, and then text me that you did, which a lot of you are already doing, and then I can go back and change the score. And if I forget some, just keep texting me when you pick it up. Unfortunately, the program doesn't tell me that you changed something. It tells me that with these other activities, but not with the discussions. And so that's one thing I wanted to make sure I tell you as well. And then this week, the other activity that we have is making a cell model. So as you work your way through the cell chapter, I want you to go around in the house and find food items or other things, like a battery is a powerhouse that's, gives energy. That could be the mitochondria, for example, and be a little creative with learning these organelles and make a little project out of that, and then make a ledger and say what is what organelle, like this does it, like right here with some food stuff. And this is also a good activity if you have kids, for example. You can incorporate them a little bit. They actually like that. And it does seem to be sounding silly, but in some ways it's that the students actually end up liking it, because it does help us learn things better when we have an activity with it. So with that, I pretty much have said what I need to say. We finish out the week with a Padlet. We already talked about that. I can't see everybody. Nobody's speaking. Well, don't be shy and talk to me. But if you don't have any further questions, then we can close it out.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Stay in touch. Make sure you do the health challenge and text us. Be involved, all right? I want to hear from you.
Okay. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.